What if the reason they never say sorry is not because they forgot what they did, but because they are watching how much pain they still have the power to cause? Think about that. The more you chase the apology, the more they feel in control. The more you explain your hurt, the more they learn that your heart is still waiting at their door. And that is why the one move most people are scared to make is often the only move that changes everything. Not begging, not proving, not one more long message. Distance, calm, silence with boundaries. That is the shift they do not see coming. And when that emotional door starts to close, pressure builds fast. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear can change how you deal with hurt, guilt, silence, blame, and those endless mind games that leave you drained. If you have ever waited for accountability from someone who acts like your pain is nothing, this is for you. And one part near the end is where everything clicks, so do not miss it. Because once you see this pattern clearly, you will never chase an empty apology the same way again. One of the biggest truths to understand is that real apologies are very uncommon with a narcissistic person, and that has less to do with your worth and more to do with the fragile, inner structure they are protecting every second. For most people, an apology is simple. You hurt someone, you admit it, you take responsibility, you try to repair the damage. But for a narcissistic mind, an apology feels dangerous. It can feel like weakness. It can feel like losing status. It can feel like exposing flaws they work hard to hide. Their self-image often depends on looking right, strong, superior, and fully justified, no matter what happened. So the second you ask them to apologize, they do not move toward reflection. They move toward defense, fast. That is where denial begins. That is where blame starts changing direction. That is where the story gets twisted until somehow they are the wounded one and you are the problem for even bringing it up. And this is why so many people feel confused. They think, if I just explain it better, maybe they will understand. But understanding is not always the issue. Protection is. Ego protection, shame avoidance, control protection. That is the hidden engine. And once you see that, a lot of their behavior starts making painful sense. Keep listening, because this next piece explains why trying harder often makes the whole thing worse. When they feel cornered by accountability, their mind does not usually say, maybe I should look at what I did. It often says, how do I escape this without losing power? That is why they may deny the event, minimize the damage, pretend you are too sensitive, or act confused as if the problem came out of nowhere. Sometimes they even rewrite the entire moment so confidently that you start questioning your own memory. That is not random. That is part of the defense. Because if they truly admit they caused harm, they may have to face shame they do not know how to carry. And shame, for this kind of personality, can feel unbearable. So instead of holding it, they throw it outward. They make you carry it. They make you defend yourself. They make you work for the basic truth. And the more you plead for fairness, the more they may dig in. Why? Because to them, admitting fault can feel like losing the upper hand. Relationships are not always seen as spaces of mutual care. They are often seen as power systems. Who leads, who bends, who chases, who needs. So if you are asking, begging, crying, writing long paragraphs, or trying over and over to get one honest apology, they may not hear your pain the way a healthy person would. They may hear leverage. They may feel control. And this is exactly why the usual methods fail. Not because your feelings are too small, but because the dynamic itself rewards their avoidance. There is another piece here that many people miss, and once you understand it, the whole pattern becomes easier to spot. Narcissistic behavior often feeds on emotional reactions, not just praise, not just admiration. Conflict works too, anger works too, tears work too, desperation works too. Emotional energy is emotional energy, and if your reaction proves that they can still affect your nervous system, they may experience that as power. So when they hurt you and you respond with intense emotion, they may not process that moment as, I need to care for this person. They may process it as, I still matter this much. I can still move them. I still have access to their inner world. That is why some of the most exhausting conversations go nowhere. You explain, they dodge, you clarify, they twist, you cry, they go cold, you try again. Nothing changes, yet somehow the cycle continues. And it continues because the emotional exchange itself keeps the connection alive, even when the connection is painful. This is hard to hear, but it matters. In many toxic dynamics, the narcissistic person is not seeking truth, repair, or mutual understanding nearly as much as they're seeking emotional engagement. Any engagement. As long as you are still pulled into the storm, the system is still feeding them. That is why people feel trapped in endless loops. Same pain, same arguments, same disappointment, different day. If this is hitting home, stay close, because the shift that breaks this pattern is quieter than most people expect. The real turning point often begins when emotional detachment replaces emotional pursuit. This does not mean becoming heartless. It does not mean pretending you never cared. And it does not mean acting cold just to punish someone. It means you stop pouring your life force into a pattern that keeps eating it. You stop chasing understanding from someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to force empathy where empathy only appears when it serves them. Instead of reacting with long speeches, panic, or emotional urgency, you begin to answer calmly, briefly, or not at all. And that shift matters more than people realize, because once your reactions start changing, the script they rely on starts breaking. The buttons they use to press do not work the same way anymore. The guilt no longer lands the way it used to. The bait does not always get a bite. The silence treatment stops feeling like a weapon and starts feeling like information. And for them, this can be deeply unsettling. They are used to knowing exactly how to pull energy out of the room. When that energy is no longer available, they feel the loss. They feel uncertainty. They feel less sure of their influence. That is when cracks begin to show. Not always on the surface, not immediately. But inside the dynamic, power starts moving. And that is the part many people are afraid of, because detachment sounds simple, but emotionally it can feel huge. Still, it is often the first real step toward freedom. And yes, sometimes it is the first thing that creates, the pressure that makes an apology more likely. Boundaries are the next part, and this is where many people make a statement but do not make a shift. A boundary is not just saying, please stop doing this. A boundary becomes real when your behavior changes after the line is crossed. That is the piece that gives it strength. Narcissistic people often test limits over and over because testing teaches them where access still exists. If they disrespect you and nothing changes, they learn that the line can be ignored. If they insult, dismiss, lie, or provoke, and you stay, explain, forgive, and continue as usual, then the message they receive is simple. This still works. And that is why weak boundaries do not create safety. They create training. But when you calmly say, if this becomes disrespectful, I will leave the conversation, and then you actually leave, something changes. When you stop responding to late night chaos, stop explaining yourself to deliberate confusion, stop rewarding cruelty with access, the pattern begins to break. At first, they may push harder. Expect that. They may mock your boundary. They may test it 5 different ways. They may act offended that you even have one. That does not mean it is failing. It often means it is finally being felt. The testing phase is part of the process. They are checking if this is real or if it is another soft request that will disappear under pressure. So the key is not emotional intensity. The key is calm repetition. No drama, no courtroom speech, just consistency. And consistency does something powerful. It teaches them that your limits now come with consequences, not just words. Silence and emotional calm can create a kind of pressure they are often not prepared for, because most toxic patterns depend on predictable reactions. They provoke, you react, they twist, you defend, they withdraw, you chase, the scene repeats. But once the reaction goes quiet, once the performance loses its audience, the whole rhythm of the relationship changes. And silence here does not mean weakness. It does not mean you have no voice. It means you are no longer lending your voice to chaos that was designed to consume it. You step back. You respond less. You refuse to argue over what is obvious. You stop trying to prove your pain to someone benefiting from denying it. That quietness can feel loud to them, very loud. Because suddenly there's no easy signal telling them they still control the emotional climate. No long message, no emotional spiral, no desperate effort to make them understand. Just space, just steadiness, just a person who is no longer dancing on command. And that can create discomfort fast. The atmosphere changes, the drama fades, the old tricks stop landing with the same force. Even the silent treatment loses some of its power when it is met with self-possession instead of panic. This is where many people make a mistake. And, they use silence as a performance, secretly hoping it will instantly force a reaction. Real detachment is different. It is not a trick. It is a shift in where your energy lives. And when that shift is real, the pressure becomes real too. Because now they are not managing your emotions as easily. And that loss of control can make them rethink their next move. Self-respect changes the balance in a way that words alone never can. The moment you stop, negotiating your own worth, the relationship begins to feel different, even if nothing has been spoken out loud yet. Narcissistic people often move toward those who are kind, patient, forgiving, and deeply willing to understand. Those are beautiful qualities. But in the wrong hands, those qualities get used. They become openings. And when someone learns they can hurt you, dismiss you, come back, and still receive full emotional access, they may keep repeating the same cycle because nothing inside the structure tells them to stop. Self-respect interrupts that. You stop asking for basic decency as if it is a favor. You stop over-explaining your hurt to make it sound acceptable. You stop treating your own pain like a small issue that needs perfect wording before it deserves to be acknowledged. Instead, you begin to carry yourself differently, more grounded, less available for nonsense, less eager to smooth over what was never yours to fix. And that shift can be subtle. Maybe you pause before answering. Maybe you no longer rush to repair after they create damage. Maybe you let uncomfortable silence stay in the room instead of filling it just to keep peace. These small changes speak loudly because they show that your center is no longer fully in their hands. The person who once chased approval now seems less hungry for it. The person who once feared distance now seems capable of creating it. And for someone who depends on influence, that change can feel this is the part that matters. Your self-respect becomes a signal that access to you is no longer automatic. When manipulation stops working, accountability becomes much harder to avoid. This is where the whole system starts to expose itself. Many narcissistic people rely on diversion as their main escape route. If the issue is that they hurt you, they make the issue your tone. If the issue is their lie, they make the issue your reaction. If the issue is their cruelty, suddenly the conversation becomes about how difficult you are to deal with. They create smoke so no one stays focused on the fire. And for a long time, that strategy works because the other person gets pulled into side battles. Defending memory, defending tone, defending intent, defending reality itself. But once you stop entering every side road, the original issue remains standing in the middle of the room, clear, unmoved, harder to escape. You do not have to win every argument for this to happen. In fact, arguing less often helps more. You simply stop helping the confusion grow. You name the behavior once. You hold the line. You disengage from the circus around it. And now they have fewer places to run. That does not mean they suddenly become deeply reflective. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes they escalate first. Sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they try charm instead of rage. But the common thread is this. The old defenses stop delivering the same result. The usual chaos no longer brings back the same access, the same emotional supply, the same surrender. And when their old methods stop paying off, a new calculation begins. If they want to regain closeness, influence, admiration, convenience, or control, they may realize that avoiding responsibility is costing them more than admitting a little of it. This is where apologies can start to appear, but this part is important, so listen carefully. When a narcissistic person finally says sorry, the reason behind it is often not the reason people hope for. Most of us connect apology with empathy, with remorse. with sincere understanding, with the desire to heal what was broken. In a healthy relationship, that is usually the goal. But in these dynamics, apology can become strategic. It can be less about your pain and more about their access, less about what they finally understood and more about what they are afraid of losing. When your reactions fade, when your boundaries stay firm, when your self-respect becomes visible, they may sense that the connection is slipping beyond their reach, and that can create urgency. Suddenly, the apology they once withheld becomes a tool to reopen the door, a way to soften you, a way to reset the cycle, a way to regain influence before you move too far away. This does not mean every apology is fake. It means the motivation matters. Watch what comes after the words. Do they change behavior, or do they just say enough to stop the consequences? Do they repair, or do they repeat? Do they listen, or do they expect instant forgiveness because they performed regret for a moment? That is the real test. Because an apology without change is often just another form of control wearing softer clothes. And if you miss that, you may mistake a temporary adjustment for a real transformation. The words can sound right. The pattern tells the truth. A lot of people secretly believe that if they can just say the perfect sentence, the other person will finally wake up and see the pain they caused. That belief is understandable. It comes from hope. It comes from love. It comes from the normal human wish to be understood by someone who mattered to you. But with a narcissistic pattern, there is often no perfect sentence waiting to unlock empathy. Sometimes the harder truth is that they heard enough already. They simply did not value it enough to respond with care. That is why endless explaining becomes a trap. You think you are building a bridge, but you may actually be feeding a loop. Every extra message becomes more material to twist. Every emotional explanation becomes more proof in their mind that they still hold your attention. So at a certain point, healing begins when you stop trying to turn your pain into a presentation for someone committed to resisting it. You do not need 10 more examples. You do not need one last heart-to-heart. You do not need a perfect closing argument. Sometimes your clarity has already arrived, and the only thing left is your decision. This is not about giving up on truth. It is about refusing to sacrifice your peace at the altar of being understood by a person who benefits from pretending not to understand. That is a hard shift, but it is also a freeing one. And if this is speaking to something deep in you, stay with it, because the next part may be exactly what you need to hear before you make your next move. There is also a quiet danger in waiting too long for an apology. The longer you wait, the more your life can start organizing itself around a moment that may never come, in the form you want. You replay conversations. You imagine what you would say if they finally admitted it. You picture the relief, the release, the closure. But slowly, almost without noticing, your emotional world becomes tied to their willingness to do one thing they may be deeply unwilling to do honestly. And that is how power gets transferred, not all at once, gradually. You start believing your healing is on hold until they acknowledge the truth. But healing built that way is fragile because it depends on someone who has already shown you how little responsibility they want to hold. Real strength begins when you stop making your peace dependent on their confession. You can recognize the harm without their agreement. You can trust your experience without their approval. You can close a chapter they still want to keep half open. This is where many people start to feel guilt because reclaiming peace can feel unfamiliar, even selfish after years of emotional overfunctioning. But it is not selfish to stop abandoning yourself. It is not cruel to stop volunteering for confusion. It is not wrong to decide that clarity matters more than keeping a broken dynamic alive. In fact, that decision is often the exact moment your energy begins returning to you. And when your energy returns to you, the whole relationship feels different, even if they never say a single honest word. Something else often happens when you step back, and it can be confusing if you are not ready for it. The narcissistic person may suddenly become nicer, softer, more attentive, maybe even unusually apologetic. They may say some of the things you begged to hear before. They may act wounded. They may act awakened. They may act like they finally understand everything. This can feel powerful, and sometimes it does reflect a temporary recognition that they are losing control of the connection. But do not let urgency blind you. Pressure can create performance. Fear of losing access can create short-term charm. And short-term charm is not the same as deep change. This is why timing matters. If the apology only comes when consequences become real, pay attention. If the tenderness only appears when distance appears, pay attention. If the promises sound beautiful but the pattern resumes the moment you soften, pay attention. None of this means you must reject every apology automatically. It means you watch for consistency, you watch for humility, you watch for action. Because the truth of a relationship is not found in one emotional moment. It is found in the repeated choices that follow. And that is where so many people get pulled back in. They confuse relief with repair. They confuse contact with care. They confuse an apology with accountability. But accountability is slower, deeper, less dramatic. It shows up over time. So if someone says sorry, let the words breathe. Let time test them. Let behavior prove them. Your heart does not need to rush just because their fear suddenly found a voice. If you want to understand the one thing that actually shifts the whole dynamic, it is this. Stop feeding the pattern that protects them from responsibility. That is the move. Not revenge, not cold games, not trying to hurt them back, just refusing to participate in the structure that has kept you begging for crumbs. When you become less reactive, less available for manipulation, less willing to abandon your own reality, the emotional landscape changes. That change creates pressure, not because you force them, but because the environment that once helped them avoid accountability no longer exists in the same way. Now they cannot lean as easily on your guilt. Now they cannot count as confidently on your endless patience. Now they cannot use confusion as freely because you are no longer standing in it trying to solve it with them. That is when the relationship reaches a crossroads. Either they adjust something or they lose something. And sometimes, yes, that is when an apology shows up. But whether it shows up or not, the deeper victory is that you are no longer trapped in the chase. You are no longer offering emotional access at the price of your dignity. You are no longer asking someone else to stamp your pain as real before you let yourself believe it. That's the real shift. That is the real power. And once a person reaches that point, they stop living on emotional crumbs and start building a life that is no longer controlled by someone else's refusal to own what they did. So if you are still wondering what to do when someone keeps hurting you and acts like accountability is too much to ask, remember this. Your strongest move is not louder pain. It is steadier distance. It is calm. It is clear limits. It is the quiet refusal to keep handing your emotional energy to a system that turns your honesty into a weapon against you. The more grounded you become, the less control they feel. The less control they feel, the more the pressure rises. And sometimes that pressure brings an apology to the surface. Not always from deep remorse, but from the realization that the old game has stopped working. That is why this approach works. It changes the conditions. It ends the reward for harmful behavior. It places your peace back in your own hands. And even if the apology you hoped for never fully arrives, you still win something far more valuable. You get your clarity back, you get your dignity back, you get your emotional center back. And from that place, you can finally see the truth without begging it to be spoken. If this opened your eyes, sit with it for a moment. Read your own story inside it. Then ask yourself one honest question. What would change in my life if I stopped chasing accountability from people who only offer it when they fear losing me? That answer may be the beginning of everything.